The chamber fell silent as Ji-hoon stood from his seat. Around him, representatives from 17 galactic empires watched with confusion as the human ambassador gathered his data tablets. The Velkari delegate was mid-sentence, demanding answers about human trade restrictions. When Ji-hoon simply turned and walked toward the exit, Min-yeon followed first, her face showing nothing. Then Hyun-woo, the military commander, rose and joined them. One by one, every human in the Galactic Council chamber stood and left. They said nothing. They did not look back. The Velkari delegate's voice rose higher, shouting questions. The Nomathi representative called out for them to wait. Others banged their appendages on their desks, demanding explanation. Ji-hoon's footsteps echoed through the vast hall as he led his people out. The heavy doors closed behind him with a boom that seemed to shake the foundation of the galaxy itself. Outside, reporters from a dozen species swarmed them. Cameras floated everywhere, broadcasting to billions of worlds. Questions came in 50 languages, translated instantly by AI systems. Ji-hoon walked through them like they were ghosts. He did not pause. He did not speak. His face remained calm and empty of emotion. On the human transport ship, Somin checked her tablet. Messages flooded in from every corner of known space. Demands, questions, threats, pleas. She marked them all as read and deleted them without responding. Hyun-woo watched the military channels. Alien fleets were repositioning, unsure what humanity's silence meant. He sent a single coded message to all human forces across 47 star systems. Hold position, maintain silence, prepare defenses. The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel. Behind them, the council chamber descended into chaos. Across human space, the order went out simultaneously. Every diplomat recalled. Every trade negotiation suspended. Every communication channel with non-humans closed. Human colonies continued their normal lives, but their borders became walls of silence. Ships arrived at human ports with cargo and found no one to speak to. Automated systems processed transactions, but no human voice answered questions. On Earth, Dayan stood in his office overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the Secretary General of the Unified. Human government watched news feeds from across the galaxy. Alien journalists speculated wildly. Some said humanity was preparing for war. Others claimed a plague had struck human worlds. A few suggested humans had finally gone insane from the stress of galactic politics. None of them understood. Not yet. Dayan thought back to 5 years ago. The human research team had discovered it by accident. On a world called Tanis IV, what the Council called a protected nature preserve. But human scientists, always curious, had sent probes deeper than permitted. They found cities buried under artificial forests. Technology destroyed and hidden. A species that had been developing spaceflight, now reduced to primitive agriculture. The evidence had been overwhelming. 40 worlds like Tanis IV. Species deliberately held back from advancement. Resources extracted while the locals were kept ignorant. All sanctioned by the Galactic Council. All hidden under words like protection and guidance and cultural preservation. Humanity had brought the evidence to the Council. Ji-hoon had presented it formally, demanding investigation. The Council had voted. 17 empires against, 0 in favor. The evidence was declared irrelevant. The discussion was closed. Humanity was warned not to interfere in matters. They did not understand dot, so humans had voted too. And their vote was silence. Min-yeon sat in her quarters on the transport, reviewing her plans. She had spent 3 years preparing for this moment. Humans were not the strongest military power in the galaxy. They were not the largest empire. They did not have the most advanced technology. But they had something others had forgotten the value of. They could be trusted. For 200 years, Humans had served as mediators in galactic disputes. When the Krell dynasty and Ashtar Federation could not agree on border rights, humans had negotiated the peace. When trade wars threatened to turn hot, humans found compromises. 70% of all major galactic agreements in the last century had human fingerprints on them. The galaxy had grown dependent on humanity's fairness. And now that fairness was gone, on Harmony Station, a human colony near Velkari space, Administrator G1 watched the alien ships arrive. 3 Velkari cruisers took position around the station. A blockade. G1 activated the defense grid and sent messages to all human residents. Stay calm. Continue normal activities. Do not respond to alien communications. The Velkari sent demands. G1 deleted them unread. They sent threats. Deleted. They sent pleas. Deleted. Hours passed. The Velkari ships held position, uncertain what to do, and their opponent refused even to acknowledge their existence. In the council chamber, emergency sessions continued for days. The Nomathi Collective proposed sending envoys to Earth. The envoys were turned away at the system's edge by silent, human patrol ships. The Velkari demanded sanctions. But sanctions required human trade routes, human banking systems, human logistics networks. Cutting off humanity meant cutting off half the galaxy's economy. Smaller empires began to panic. The Taurix Confederacy had relied on human mediation to maintain peace with their neighbors for 80 years. Without that buffer, old tensions resurfaced. The Orcian Compact discovered their entire commercial fleet scheduling system was human-designed and human-maintained. Without human technical support, their trade ground to a halt within a week. Soman compiled reports from intelligence operatives across the galaxy. The data showed what Minyong had predicted. Confusion was turning to concern. Concern was turning to fear. Not fear of human military action, but fear of human absence. The galaxy was learning what it had taken for granted. 3 months after the silence began, Minyong authorized the first and only message humanity would send. It was not directed at governments or councils. It was broadcast on every public channel, in every known language, across every inhabited world. Ambassador Ji-hoon appeared on screens everywhere. He stood in the empty human seat of the Galactic Council Chamber. His voice was quiet but clear. We will speak when there is something worth saying. That was all. 33 words in standard galactic language. Then the channel went dark again. On Earth, Dayan permitted himself a small smile. Let them wonder what that meant. Let them question what it would take for humanity to find something worth saying. Let them search their own actions for answers. The galaxy had spent 200 years talking. Now it was time to listen. Even if all they heard was silence, especially if all they heard was silence. The Velkari blockade of Harmony Station entered its 3rd month. Commander Hyun-woo stood on the bridge of the defense platform, watching 3 alien cruisers maintain their positions. His weapons were armed. His shields were at full power. But his communication channels remained closed. That the Velkari had tried everything. They had sent formal demands. They had broadcast threats of military action. They had even tried friendly messages, asking simply for acknowledgement. Hyun-woo read each one as it arrived, then deleted it. His orders were clear. Silence was humanity's only weapon right now, and he would not waste a single round. On the station below, Ji-won managed 15,000 human colonists. Life continued normally inside the habitat. Children went to school. Adults worked their jobs. The hydroponics gardens grew food. Water recyclers hummed. To someone inside, nothing had changed except that the news feeds showed no alien content anymore. But Ji-won watched the supply reports carefully. The station could sustain itself for 18 months without resupply. After that, they would need to make decisions. She trusted that humanity's silence would break the blockade long before then. The Velkari economy was suffering far more than Harmony Station was. Across the galaxy, cracks were showing. The Krell dynasty and the Ashtar Federation had maintained an uneasy peace for 30 years, negotiated by human diplomats. 3 weeks after humanity went silent, border incidents began. Small at first. A Krell mining ship crossed into disputed space. An Ashtar patrol fired warning shots. The Krell responded with live weapons. Within days, skirmishes erupted along the entire border. Both sides sent messages to Earth requesting mediation. The messages went unanswered. Both sides grew angrier, blaming the other for the conflict and blaming humanity for abandoning them. Neither side looked at their own actions. Somin tracked it all from her intelligence post. Her screens showed 14 separate conflicts that had emerged in the 3 months since the silence began. All of them had previously been managed by human intervention. Now they burned hot, and the galaxy was learning what peace had cost. But Summon's main focus was elsewhere. Her team had been leaking information. Carefully, anonymously, documents appeared on public. Networks showing council manipulation of developing worlds. Financial records revealed systematic resource theft. Communications between council members discussed managing younger species like farmers managing livestock. The galaxy's media could not ignore it. Investigative journalists from 24 species picked up the threads. Some dismissed it as human propaganda. Others dug deeper and found more evidence. The truth was there for anyone willing to look. On the Nomathi homeworld, a researcher named Sunhee compiled everything she could find. The Nomathi prided themselves on being ethical, on following proper procedures. Sunhee had served in galactic administration for 40 years. She had always believed the system was just the documents shattered that belief. She found records of council meetings she had attended, where decisions were made that she now understood differently. A vote to establish a preserve on Tanis 4. She had supported it, thinking they were protecting a developing ecosystem. Now she saw the truth. They had been hiding a crime. Sunny wrote a report. She submitted it to the Nomathi High Council. Then she did something unprecedented. She sent a copy to every human embassy, even though she knew no human would respond. She sent it because she needed them to know that someone understood. Someone saw what they saw. On Earth, Dayon read Sunhee's report. He felt a moment of hope. The silence was working. People were questioning. People were looking. People were finding the truth that had been buried under 2 centuries of comfortable lies. But he also read the war reports. The Krell-Ashtar conflict was escalating. Civilian casualties were mounting. His advisors pressed him to intervene, to speak, to stop the bloodshed. Dayon refused. If humanity broke silence to solve every crisis, nothing would change. The galaxy needed to face what it had become. Min Young worked in secret. She had spent years building relationships with reformers in various governments. People like Sunhee who believed in real justice. Now she contacted them through encrypted channels, never using human communication systems. Her messages were simple. Look at the evidence. Talk to each other. Build something new. It was dangerous work. If the Council learned humans were actively organizing opposition, they might unite against Earth. But Minyong calculated that the hardliners were too busy fighting among themselves. The Velkari were demanding military action against humanity. The Orsian were calling for negotiation. The Taurics wanted sanctions. The Council could not agree on anything. That paralysis was exactly what humanity needed. On the transport lanes, a young freighter captain named Taijin made his deliveries. He carried food to stations running low on supplies. He transported medicine to worlds affected by the new conflicts. He did it all without saying a word to anyone outside human space. Alien dockworkers would approach his ship, trying to ask questions or share news. Taijin would smile politely, complete his business through automated systems, and leave. His silence was not rude. It was simply absolute stories spread about the quiet human who helped but never spoke. Some called him a hero. Others called him frustrating. Taijin did not care what they called him. He had his orders, and he believed in them. In academic circles, a human philosopher named Hana published an essay. It was titled "The Weight of Words Not Spoken," and it circulated through human networks before being leaked to alien media. Hana argued that speech had become too cheap in galactic society. Everyone talked constantly, saying nothing of value. Silence, she wrote, had become the most radical form of communication. The essay went viral. Alien philosophers debated it. Students discussed it. Politicians condemned it or praised it depending on their positions. Hannah said nothing more. She had made her point. 4 months into the silence, the Namathi Collective made a formal announcement. They were opening an investigation into council practices regarding developing worlds. They invited any species with evidence to come forward. They specifically acknowledged that humanity had brought such evidence to the council 5 years ago, and that the evidence had been dismissed without proper review. It was not an apology, but it was an admission. Payan watched the Namathi announcement and felt the weight on his shoulders ease slightly. Progress. Slow, painful progress. But progress nonetheless. That same week, the Valkyrie economy contracted by 8%. Without access to human trade networks, and without human mediation in their own disputes with neighboring systems, their merchant class was suffering. Protests erupted on Valkyrie colonial worlds. The blockade of Harmony Station was costing more than it was worth. Haiyan Wu watched the Valkyrie cruisers. He could see the signs. Their patrol patterns had become less aggressive. Their positioning was defensive rather than threatening. They were maintaining the blockade because their leadership had ordered it, but their hearts were no longer in it. On the station, Jiwan received a strange message. It came through civilian channels, not military or government. A Valkyrie merchant was asking if human traders might be willing to meet in neutral space to discuss resuming business. The merchant offered to exclude government officials entirely. Jiwan deleted the message as ordered, but she noted it in her report. The cracks were widening. The galaxy was learning. Every conflict that escalated without human mediation taught a lesson. Every economic disruption taught another. Every piece of evidence of council crimes taught a third. The lessons were hard and painful, but they were sinking in. Humanity remained silent. But their silence was the loudest voice in known space. 8 months had passed since Ji-Hoon walked out of the council chamber. In that time, the galaxy had transformed in ways no one had predicted. The Valkyrie blockade of Harmony Station collapsed on a Tuesday. The cruisers simply withdrew without explanation. Hyunwoo watched them jump to faster-than-light travel and felt no satisfaction. The blockade had failed because the Valkyrie economy was in free fall. 40% of their trade had depended on human logistics networks. Their government had finally accepted that pride was not worth poverty, but the bigger change was happening in the council itself. 3 smaller empires had formally withdrawn from council sessions. The Maverus Union, the Dathri Alliance, and the Kelric Combine all issued statements saying they had lost faith in galactic governance. None of them mentioned humanity by name, but everyone understood. Summons intelligence reports showed something remarkable. 7 species had begun organizing what they called the Coalition of Conscience. They were all minor powers, species that had always followed humanity's lead in council votes. Now, without humans to guide them, they were finding their own voice, and that voice was angry. The coalition had begun investigating council archives. They found records going back centuries. Species that had mysteriously failed to develop spaceflight despite being on the verge. resources that disappeared from worlds under Council protection. The pattern was undeniable once you knew to look for it. On Earth, Dayan made a decision. Humanity had been silent for long enough. It was time to speak once and say everything that mattered. Ji-hoon prepared the data packet carefully. It contained 200 years of documentation. Every formal complaint humanity had filed with the Council. Every investigation humanity had requested. Every time human diplomats had pointed out injustices and been ignored or dismissed. The packet was enormous. Thousands of documents. Millions of data points. But the message was simple. We tried to fix this from within. You would not listen. On the anniversary of the silence, exactly 8 months to the day, Ji-hoon transmitted the packet to every government in the galaxy. Not just to the Council, but to everyone. Every empire, every colony, every independent station. He sent it on open channels so the media could access it. He sent it in every known language. Then humanity went silent again. The galaxy erupted. News organizations spent weeks just cataloging what was in the packet. Human complaints about Tanis 4 dated back 15 years. Warnings about resource exploitation dated back 40 years. Requests for ethics investigations dated back a century. The evidence was impossible to deny. Humanity had not left the Council in sudden anger. They had left after generations of being ignored. Ming-Young watched the response carefully. She had predicted 3 possible reactions: denial, deflection, or acceptance. The galaxy showed all 3, split along predictable lines. The Velkari and their hardline allies chose denial. The documents were declared forgeries. Human intentions were called into question. Propaganda, they said. Lies designed to destabilize the galactic order. But their denials rang hollow. Too many independent journalists verified the documents. Too many species had their own copies of the same records. The truth was out, and denial only made the deniers look guilty that other empires chose deflection. Yes, mistakes had been made, but they were old mistakes. The current leadership was not responsible. Why should today's government be blamed for yesterday's crimes? These arguments found more support, but still fell short. The exploitation was not historical. It was ongoing. Human complaints from just 5 years ago detailed current operations on Tanis 4 and 6 other worlds. Then there were those who chose acceptance. The Nomathi led this group. Sun He had become a public figure in her government, pushing for reform. She gave speeches about institutional failure and moral responsibility. She argued that the Council had betrayed its own founding principles. More species joined her. The Coalition of Conscience grew to 12 members. They demanded the Council be dissolved and rebuilt with proper oversight. They wanted accountability for past crimes. They wanted guarantees against future ones. The Council tried to hold emergency sessions, but could not reach quorum. Too many empires were now boycotting. The 1,000-year-old institution was dying, unable to function without the consensus it had once taken for granted. Meanwhile, the Krell-Ashtar War had spiraled into a full conflict. Millions of civilians fled the border regions. Ref. UG ships crowded into neutral zones, overwhelmed and desperate. Hyunwoo received authorization from Earth for the first military action since the silence began. Human defense fleets moved into the refugee corridors. They did not contact either the Krell or Ashtar governments. They simply positioned themselves to protect civilian ships. When Krell warships approached a refugee convoy, they found human destroyers in the way. The humans did not communicate. They did not threaten. They simply sat there, shields up, weapons armed, daring the Krell to fire on refugees under human protection. The Krell did not fire. Neither did the Ashtar when they encountered the same situation. Whatever else humanity had become, no one wanted to be the species that started a war with Earth. Young freighter captain named Taijin volunteered for the refugee operations. He made run after run, his cargo holds filled with scared families. He delivered them to safe stations and immediately went back for more. Other human captains did the same. Alien refugees would try to thank them. The humans would smile, but say nothing. They had a job to do. Words were not part of it. The silence had taken on a life of its own. It had become a statement that grew louder the longer it lasted. Every crisis that humanity addressed through action, rather than words, reinforced the message. Your talking means nothing. Watch what we do instead. On academic networks, Hana's philosophy of meaningful silence had spawned dozens of responses. Some aliens embraced it, arguing their own civilizations talked too much and acted too little. Others rejected it as self-righteous and harmful. The debates raged constantly. Hana herself wrote one more essay, her last before she too went silent. She argued that humanity was not trying to lecture other species. They were simply showing an alternative. In a galaxy drowning in words, silence became revolutionary. Back on the Namathi homeworld, Sun-Hee did something unprecedented. She requested permission to travel to Earth, not as an official envoy, but as a private citizen. She wanted to deliver a message, even if no human would respond to it. Her government approved. Perhaps they hoped she might break through the silence. Perhaps they just wanted to support her idealism. Either way, she went. Sun-Hee's ship approached Earth's orbital defenses. She transmitted her intention to visit. No response came, but the defensive systems did not activate. She took that as permission. On Earth's surface, she went to the empty human seat in the Council's Earth headquarters. The building was maintained, but unused, a monument to an abandoned institution. She left a data chip containing the Namathi official apology. A real apology, not diplomatic words, but an admission of complicity and a promise to do better. She left without seeing any humans. But security footage showed her visit. Daeyoon watched it and felt something shift. The Namathi understood. Perhaps others would too. That same week, 12 empires announced the formation of the new assembly. It would replace the council with a structure based on accountability and transparency. They invited all species to join, including humanity, but only if they agreed to the new principles. The invitation sat on Daeyoon's desk. Min-Yong analyzed every word. Ji-Hoon consulted with the human delegation. They were not ready to respond yet. But for the first time since the silence began, they were considering what breaking it might mean. The galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if humanity would speak again. And if so, what they would say. 14 months into the silence, the galaxy split into 3 groups. There were those who wanted reform, those who wanted revenge, and those who just wanted everything to go back to how it was before humanity stopped talking. The reformers were winning. The new assembly had grown to include 18 empires. They were drafting a constitution based on principles humanity had advocated for decades. Self-determination for all species. Transparency in all operations. Protection without interference. Every rule designed to prevent the exploitation that had been standard practice under the old Council. The Namathi led this effort, with Sun-Hee as their primary representative. She had become the bridge between humanity and the rest of the galaxy, even though that bridge only carried traffic one direction. Humans read everything she sent. They just never responded. But the reactionaries were organizing too. The Velkari had found allies among empires that benefited from the old system. 5 major powers formed what they called the Restoration Coalition. They claimed the new assembly was a human puppet government. They said the galaxy was being destabilized by Earth's silence, and that order needed to be restored by force if necessary. General Seojun monitored their military movements from his command post on Mars, The Restoration Coalition was positioning fleets near human space. Not attacking, not yet, but preparing. Seojun updated human defensive positions and ran combat simulations. His orders were still to avoid conflict, but he would be ready if conflict came anyway. On Earth, Daeon faced the hardest decision of his life. The new assembly had sent their formal proposal. It was everything humanity had asked for. Reforms, accountability, oversight, guarantees. If humans accepted and joined the new assembly, they could begin rebuilding galactic society on better foundations. But if they spoke too soon, the message would be lost. The galaxy needed to understand that silence was not a tactic. It was a commitment. Humanity would not speak just because someone finally offered what should have been standard all along. Minyoung argued for accepting. The new assembly was genuine. They had done the work. Continuing silence now would be stubborn rather than principled. Ji-hoon argued for waiting. The Restoration Coalition was still a threat. If humanity spoke now, and the reactionaries destroyed the new assembly, the silence would have meant nothing. They debated for weeks. The delegation split almost evenly. In the end, Daeyeon made the call. They would accept the new assembly's proposal, but with one condition. Humanity reserved the right to go silent again if the reforms failed. The galaxy needed to know that Earth's voice was a privilege, not a guarantee. Before the acceptance could be delivered, everything changed. A human scientist named Yoonji had been studying developmental patterns in species approaching spaceflight capability. She was working from old Council data, cross-referenced with humanity's own observations. What she found made her blood run cold. 2 species were within 20 years of achieving spaceflight. The Viroshi on a world called Kellan 7, and the Pentaxi on Durov 3. Both were under Council protection zones. Both showed the same warning signs as Tanis 4, resource extraction operations disguised as research stations. Technology suppression protocols hidden in the administrative files. The exploitation had not stopped. It had just moved to worlds where no one was watching anymore. Yoonji brought her findings to Daeyeon immediately. He called an emergency meeting of the entire human leadership. If this was true, if the crimes were continuing even as the new assembly promised reform, then the silence could not break. Not yet. But there was another problem. The Viroshi and Pentaxi would reach the threshold of potential contact within months. If humanity stayed silent, those species would make contact with a galaxy that was still arguing about how to treat them. The reactionaries might get to them first. Hai and Wu proposed a military solution. Human ships could blockade both worlds, preventing anyone from interfering. But that would mean imposing humanity's will by force, becoming exactly what they accused the Council of being. Minyoung suggested leaking the evidence, the way they had leaked Vitanis 4 documents. Let the galaxy discover the ongoing crimes and force the issue. But Soman pointed out that would take months, and these species did not have months. Ji-hoon saw the trap. Silence had been powerful because it was simple. The moment humanity acted in complex ways, choosing some species to protect, but not others, making judgments about who deserved what, they would lose the moral clarity that made the silence effective. The human leadership was deadlocked, and time was running out. Then the Restoration Coalition made their move. 5 fleets jumped into human space simultaneously, not attacking civilian targets, but positioning around Earth, Mars, and 3 major colony worlds. They sent a simple message: join the new assembly, and we will consider it an act of war. Remain neutral, and we will leave peacefully. It was a blockade designed to prevent humanity from supporting the reforms. The reactionaries had decided that without human participation, the new assembly would collapse. They were probably right. Hyung-woo activated the human defense fleets. Every ship, every station, every orbital platform went to full combat readiness. The Restoration Coalition had positioned themselves aggressively, but human forces outnumbered them 3-1 in human space. On the bridge of his flagship, Hing-Wu received the authorization he had been waiting for 14 months to get. If the Restoration Coalition did not withdraw within 6 hours, he had permission to remove them by force. The reactionaries saw the human response and sent frantic messages. Demands, threats, justifications. They had expected humanity to stay silent and passive. They had not expected to face the full might of human military power. General Seojun launched a humanitarian operation that would become legend. While the home fleets faced down the Restoration Coalition, he took 3 carrier groups to the Krell Ashtar war zone. The fighting there had created a refugee crisis, affecting 3 million civilians trapped on border worlds. Seojun's forces landed on those worlds without asking permission from either the Krell or Ashtar. They secured landing zones, evacuated civilians, and departed before either military could respond. In 72 hours, they extracted everyone who wanted to leave. The Krell sent furious protests. Seojun ignored them. The Ashtar demanded an explanation. Seojun ignored them too. He had civilians to save, and no time for diplomatic theater. The message was clear. Humanity had been silent, but humanity had not been passive. They had been choosing their moments. And now their moment had come. Back at Earth, the 6-hour deadline approached. The Restoration Coalition had not withdrawn. Their commanders apparently believed humanity was bluffing, that the species known for mediation and peace would not actually open fire. They were wrong. At precisely 6 hours and 1 minute, Hyun-Woo gave the order. Human ships fired, not on the enemy vessels, but around them. Weapons-grade precision shots that could have destroyed their reactionary fleets, but instead created a cage of plasma around each ship. The message was simple. We can destroy you whenever we choose. Leave now, or we stop missing. The Restoration Coalition withdrew, not because they were outgunned, though they were, but because they suddenly understood what humanity's restraint had really meant. Humans had not been peaceful because they were weak. They had been peaceful because they were strong enough not to need violence. Until now, the young watched the reactionary fleets retreat and felt the weight of command. Humanity had maintained silence for 14 months. They had maintained peace for longer. But both silence and peace had limits, and those limits had been reached. On his desk sat 3 items. The new Assembly's proposal, Yoonji's report on the 2 developing species, and the authorization for Ji-hoon to speak again. It was time to break the silence. But humanity would speak on their terms, not anyone else's. Dae-yeon made his decision. He called Ji-hoon to his office and gave him the authorization. Humanity would accept the new Assembly's proposal with conditions. They would demand immediate protection for the Viroshi and Pentaxi, and they would make clear that silence remained an option if promises were broken. Ji-hoon prepared his statement. After 421 days of silence, humanity would speak, and the galaxy would listen, because now they understood what it meant when humanity chose not to speak. The message went out the next day. Short, clear, and absolute. We accept, on the condition that our silence remains an option should you fail us again. The galaxy had held its breath for 14 months. Now it could exhale. Humanity was speaking again. But everyone knew the silence was not over. It was only paused. And that made every word humanity spoke worth listening. To Day 422. Ji-hoon walked into the new Assembly's first official session at Horizon Point, a deformer human colony that had been converted into neutral ground. Representatives from 23 species waited for him, some with hope, some with fear, all with questions. Ji-hoon stood at the podium and spoke his first words to the galaxy in over 14 months. We return not as supplicants, but as guardians of the principles you abandoned. The chamber was silent. After so long without human voices in galactic politics, even this simple statement carried enormous weight. Ji-hoon continued. For 421 days, humanity said nothing. We watched conflicts escalate. We watched economies collapse. We watched you search for someone to blame. But the truth was always in front of you. You created these problems by choosing convenience over justice. We simply stopped helping you hide from that truth. He placed a data tablet on the podium. This contains humanity's conditions for participation in the new assembly. First, immediate protection for the Veroshi and Pentaxi homeworlds. Second, full investigation of all previous Council protection zones. Third, reparations for species harmed by systematic exploitation. Fourth, human oversight of all first contact protocols. And fifth, recognition that humanity reserves the right to withdraw our participation if these principles are violated. Sun-Hee spoke first among the alien delegates. The Nomathi Collective accepts all conditions without reservation. We have spent the last year learning what our complicity cost. We will not make the same mistakes again. One by one, the reformist empires agreed. Some added their own conditions, their own reforms, their own acknowledgments of past failures. The new Galactic Compact was born not from one species imposing rules, but from multiple species choosing to hold each other accountable. Then came the moment everyone had feared. A message arrived from the Restoration Coalition. Their fleets had regrouped after their humiliating retreat from Earth. Now they were approaching Horizon Point, 5 carriers, 40 destroyers. Hundreds of fighters. The reactionaries had decided that if they could not prevent the new assembly from forming, they would destroy it at its birth. Hyan-Wu was ready. The human defense fleet had been positioned in waiting for exactly this scenario. As the Restoration Coalition dropped out of faster-than-light travel near Horizon Point, they found themselves surrounded by human ships. The commander of the reactionary fleet, a Volcari admiral named Cormith, sent a challenge. You outnumber us, but you will not fire. Humanity's restraint is weakness. You proved that with your pathetic silence. Hyun-Woo responded, and his words were broadcast across the galaxy. Our restraint was never weakness. It was a choice. You forced us to make a different choice. The human fleet opened fire, but not on the reactionary ships. Instead, they targeted the space around Horizon Point, filling it with sensor interference and weapons-grade radiation. They created a bubble of chaos that made accurate targeting impossible for anyone. Then human Marines launched boarding operations against every major reactionary vessel simultaneously, not to destroy the ships, but to disable their weapons and engines. Within an hour, the entire Restoration Coalition fleet was dead in space. Crews unharmed, but ships helpless. Hyan-Wu sent one more message to Admiral Cormith. You are alive because we choose mercy. Your ships still function because we choose restraint. But make no mistake, humanity's silence taught the galaxy to listen. Our actions today teach a different lesson. We can end this conflict whenever we want. The question is whether you are wise enough to let it end peacefully. The Restoration Coalition surrendered, not because they had no choice, though they did not, but because they finally understood the calculation. Humanity had not been afraid to fight. They had been too principled to fight unnecessarily. Now that fighting had become necessary, the reactionaries learned what humanity was truly capable of. On Horizon Point, the signing ceremony continued as if there had been no interruption. The new Galactic Compact was signed by 23 founding empires. Ji-hoon signed on behalf of humanity, adding his name to a document that would reshape galactic civilization. But he also added a note in the margin, handwritten in both human and galactic standard script. We will be watching. Within weeks, the reforms began. Yoonji led teams to Column 7 and Durov 3. The resource extraction operations were shut down. The technology suppression protocols were deleted. The Veroshi and Pontaxi were left to develop at their own pace, with humanity promising to make proper first contact when those species were ready. Across the galaxy, 89 species that had been under old Council protection zones gained full sovereignty. Some were ready for interstellar contact. Others needed more time. The new assembly respected their development stages and simply protected them from interference. General Seojon founded the Peace Guard, a volunteer force drawn from 23 species committed to protection without conquest. His rescue operation in the Krell-Ashtar war zone had inspired thousands of aliens to join. They trained under human protocols, learning that sometimes the most powerful weapon was the discipline not to use weapons at all. The Krell and Ashtar finally ended their war, mediated not by humans, but by a joint team of Nomathi and Coalition of Conscience members. They had learned to solve their own problems. Humanity observed, but did not interfere unless asked. Captain Taijin returned to civilian freight operations, but now he talked freely with his alien customers. They would ask him about the silence, about what it had meant. He would smile and say the same thing every time. "We stopped talking so you would start listening." His ship became famous, visited by journalists and historians. Taijin accommodated them all with patient good humor. But he never claimed to be special. He was just one of millions of humans who had held the line during the silence. Philosopher Hana wrote one final essay, published on the first anniversary of humanity's return to speech. It was titled, "The Weight of Words Spoken Carefully." She argued that the silence had not been the point. The point was learning when to speak and when not to. Words mattered, but only if people used them with intention. The essay was taught in schools across the galaxy. Young aliens and humans alike studied it, learning the philosophy that had changed everything. Min Young became co-chair of the Galactic Ethics Council alongside Sunny. Together they built oversight systems designed to prevent the exploitation that had made the silence necessary. They were not perfect systems, but they were honest ones, with real accountability and real consequences for violations. On Earth, Daeun watched it all unfold. The galaxy had transformed in ways he had hoped for, but never quite believed possible. The silence had worked, not because it was comfortable or easy, but because it forced everyone to face truths they had been avoiding. He gave one last address to humanity before retiring from office. "We chose silence not to punish them, but to force them to hear what their own conscience was saying. We stopped being their excuse. We stopped smoothing over their failures. And in that absence, they found the will to do better." 10 years later, Ji-hoon was old and gray. He spent his time teaching young diplomats at the Academy of Galactic Relations on Earth. His students came from dozens of species, all learning the lessons of what became known as the Great Silence. One day, a young human student asked him, "Would we do it again if needed?" Ji-hoon thought carefully before answering. "We would not have to. They remember what our silence meant, and that memory ensures we will never need to be silent again." But another student, a Nomathi, asked a harder question. "What if you are wrong? What if they forget?" Ji-hoon smiled, a knowing expression that showed he had considered this question many times. "Then we remind him, not with weapons, not with threats, but with the same thing that worked before. We stop participating in systems that violate our principles. We let them face the consequences of their own choices, and we wait for them to remember why they needed us in the first place." The classroom fell silent, students thinking about what that meant. Then Ji-hoon added one more thing. "But I do not think they will forget, because every assembly session begins with a moment of silence now. 30 seconds where no one speaks. where everyone remembers that the most powerful voices sometimes belong to those who know when not to speak. That silence is not empty. It is full of everything we choose not to say. On Column 7, the Varoshi achieved their first successful orbital launch. Human observers watched from a distance, saying nothing, interfering with nothing. When the Varoshi were ready for contact, humanity would be there to greet them properly. Until then, humans would simply watch and protect. On Durov 3, the Pantaxi built their first radio telescope. They sent signals into space, asking if anyone was out there. The signals reached human monitoring stations. The humans recorded them, studied them, and waited. In 15 years, perhaps 20, the Pantaxi would be ready for an answer. Humanity would wait. In the new assembly chambers at Horizon Point, a session was called to order. 23 species, now grown to 31, took their seats. They began with the traditional moment of silence. 30 seconds where the chamber held its breath. Then the session began, and voices filled the hall. Debates, discussions, disagreements, and compromises. The work of building a better galaxy was loud and messy and difficult, but everyone remembered that the noise was only possible because humanity had shown them the value of silence. And they remembered that if they failed, if they forgot the lessons, humanity would go silent again. That possibility kept them honest. That memory kept them trying. And the galaxy was better for it. In a small house on Earth, a young girl named Una celebrated her 10th birthday. She had been born during the silence, in those 421 days when humanity spoke to no one outside their own worlds. Her parents told her stories about that time, about why it had been necessary, about what it had achieved. Una listened and understood. Someday, perhaps, her generation would face similar choices. When to speak, when to stay silent, when to participate, when to withdraw. But for now, the galaxy talked and worked and grew together. And somewhere in all that noise, humans listened carefully, making sure the words still had meaning, because the silence was not over. It was only paused. And everyone knew it. That knowledge changed everything.